11.8 Factor by Grouping Day 2. Now this is on the back side of your Day 1 notes. Today we're going to be factoring by grouping while factoring trinomials. Now previously, when we factored a trinomial, a polynomial with 3 terms, we factored using the guess and check method. But today we're going to learn a new method, which is using our factoring by grouping while we factor trinomials. Now this is just another tool to put in your toolbox. You might find that factoring using guess and check method is easier and sometimes faster. This is just a method to know how to do in case you get stuck. So our first one is 2x squared minus 13x plus 6. Now our first step, we are going to multiply our a term and our c term. So 2x squared times 6 is 12x squared. So our first thing we did was multiply our a and c term together. The next thing we're going to do is create our graphic organizer. When we create our graphic organizer, this time not our c term, but our ac term is going to go up top. So here I have 12x squared. Our b term is still going to go on bottom, negative 13x. Next, we're going to find the two factors that multiply to 12x squared, but add to negative 13x. If you are thinking about them both being the same sign, and that means they are both negative, we have negative 12x and negative 1x. So here are the two factors that we're going to replace in our trinomial. Writing down the first term, I have 2x squared, and here's where our two terms come into play, negative 12x and negative 1x. And then we write our c term down just like it was previously. Now all we've done with this trinomial is we have created a polynomial with 4 terms that is equivalent. If you notice, negative 12x minus 1x would bring us back up to negative 13x. Once again, we found these two numbers by multiplying our a and c term and finding what terms add to that b term. In this case, negative 12 and negative 1. Our last step we are going to do with this, now once we have 4 terms, is factor by grouping. So just like the other day's notes, I'm going to split my polynomial in half, and I'm going to factor out what's in common between my first 2 terms. So between 2x squared and negative 12x, I have 2x in common. I'm going to factor that out. That leaves x minus 6 left from that binomial. And I'm looking at my second half of the polynomial now. Remember, we want those set of parentheses to match. These are the correct numbers matching, but the signs are not matching. Plus, this has a negative on the outside front term. So I'm going to factor out a negative 1. This would factor out of here, leaving as x minus 6, flipping those signs as I factor out a negative. Now we are on the right track for factoring by grouping because we have found 2 things in the parentheses that are similar. I'm going to factor that out first and then write whatever is left over. My 2x minus 1 is my leftover. So x minus 6 times 2x minus 1 are my 2 factors for this trinomial. We can check those by multiplying them back to the original, but this is how we factor trinomials by using grouping. Guess and check may have been a quicker method for this one, and so when you get to practicing on your own, you'll find which method you like best and when is the best time to actually use factor by grouping. But let's keep practicing that factoring by grouping with the following trinomials. My first problem is 6x squared minus 23x plus 10. Okay, our first step to factor this one, once again, I'm going to multiply my a and my c term together. 6x squared times 10 gives me 60x squared. That's the term that's going to go up top of my graphic organizer. The number that goes on bottom is still my b term, negative 23x. Now we've got to find two terms that multiply to positive 60, but add to negative 23. Just like our last one, we have a multiplying to positive but adding to negative, so we know both of these factors are negative. The factors are negative 20x and negative 3x. Now these are the new factors I'm going to replace with my middle term to create a four-term polynomial. So now I have 6x squared minus 20x minus 3x plus 10. All right, so now I have my four terms here. I can factor these out. Split your four-term polynomial in half. Between 6x squared and negative 20x, I have in common a 2 from the numbers and an x from the variables. This will leave 3x minus 10. Now looking at the second one's very similar to the last one, we have the correct numbers, but we do not have the correct sign. So I'm going to factor out a negative 1, and this will leave 3x minus 10. These are matching, so we know we have done grouping correctly. And so my two terms will be the 3x minus 10 factors out, and what's left behind is 2x minus 1. Now look at our original term here, 6x squared. 6 is a composite number, so we had multiple options with that. We had 1 times 6 and 2 times 3. It ended up being our 2 times 3, but maybe this factoring by grouping is a better method for this because we had a lot of options for our front term and we had a lot of options for our c term. All right, number 2. The problem is 8x squared minus 37x minus 15. All right, starting this problem in the same fashion, I'm going to multiply my a term times my c term. 8x squared times negative 15 will give me negative 120x squared. The number at bottom is my b term, negative 37x. Now notice how large these numbers got. Sometimes factoring by grouping with a trinomial can get kind of tedious because the numbers get so large and there's so many options to go through that you might as well guess and check. So looking for two numbers that multiply to negative 120 but add to negative 37. We have negative 40x and positive 3x. I'm going to replace these two middle terms to create my four-term polynomial. 8x squared minus 40x plus 3x minus 15. Don't forget, these numbers, negative 40x and positive 3x, should always add back to that negative 37x. We are just replacing, we are extending this trinomial to a four-term polynomial. I'm going to cut this in half and start my factoring by grouping. Between 8x squared and negative 40x, I have 8x in common. This will leave x minus 5 on that binomial. Next, looking at my second terms, I have 3x minus 15. These numbers have a positive 3 in common. Notice my sign with this x minus 5 is already minus for the second term. That's why we factored out a positive this time. So I have x minus 5 left over. So x minus 5 is my matching term. That's what I'm going to factor out first. And then 8x plus 3 was my factors that was left over. So my final answer is x minus 5 times 8x minus 3. All right, moving on to number 3. Our problem is 10x squared plus 2x minus 8. Now before we factor this, you might notice something. We have a GCF. Still, no matter what method you use, always factor out your GCF first. So I'm going to factor out a 2, which leaves me 5x squared plus 1x minus 4. All right, the next thing we're going to do, now that we have our factored out with our GCF, multiply your A term to your C term. 5x squared times negative 4 gives me negative 20x squared. And put your B term in the bottom of your graphic organizer, positive 1x. What two terms multiply to negative 20x squared but add to positive 1x squared? Well, we have here a positive 5x and a negative 4x would add together to positive 1x and multiply to negative 20x squared. Don't forget to leave your 2 on the outside of your problem. Next, I'm going to rewrite 5x squared, my two terms of 5x and negative 4x and minus 4. My next step is to factor by grouping. So I'm going to split my polynomial in half and factor out what's in common between my first terms. Still writing my GCF there so I don't forget about it. So between 5x squared and 5x, they have in common a 5 and an x, leaving behind x plus 1. Next, looking at negative 4x and negative 4, well, this leading term is negative, and we need the positives to match up with our sets of parentheses. So I'm going to factor out a negative 4, leaving this one with x plus 1. Last, I'm going to write my factors. 2 as my GCF, x plus 1 factoring out of those two terms being the same, and 5x minus 4 with what's left over. Now I'm completely factored. All right, I'm going to let you try the next one on your own. The problem is 7x squared minus 9x plus 2. Pause the video and try factoring this one out. Okay, when I multiplied 7x squared and 2, I got 14x squared, and I was adding to negative 9. The two factors that I used were negative 2x and negative 7x. It doesn't matter what order you put these in, it'll just come out factoring in a different order. So maybe you put negative 7x here and negative 2x here. Doesn't matter the order. You replace them into your trinomial to create your 4-term polynomial. So I put 7x squared minus 2x minus 7x plus 2. Once again, if you have these in different orders, that's okay. My terms with 7x squared and negative 2x, they only had x in common, leaving 7x minus 2. And I noticed these numbers were correct, but the signs were not. So I factored out a negative 1, which left 7x minus 2. So my two factors are 7x minus 2 times x minus 1. Once again, if you put them in different orders, your factors may be flipped around. But multiplication is commutative, so it doesn't matter what order yours ends up being. Okay, number 5. Your problem is 3x squared minus 2x minus 40. Pause the video and solve this one out. Okay, when I multiplied 3x squared and negative 40, I got negative 120x squared. And I was adding to my negative 2x. Once again, this one's kind of large again to do factor by grouping, but the two terms that I found out that worked were negative 12x and positive 10x. They multiply to negative 120x squared, and they add to negative 2x. Then I split my four-term polynomial in half and factored by grouping. Grouped out a 3x from the first two terms, leaving x minus 4, and then factored a positive 10 to get x minus 4. So my solution was x minus 4 times 3x plus 10. Okay, hopefully you're getting a little better at this method. Like I said, we have multiple methods to use for this. So, to our next one. Number 6. Our problem is 30x squared minus 55x plus 15. Pause the video and try this one out. Don't forget about GCF. Okay, GCF for this problem, there was a positive 5. So I factored my 5 out, and then I multiplied my new a and c term together. 6x squared times 3 is 18x squared. My middle term of negative 11x gave me the two terms of negative 9x and negative 2x. I split my polynomial in half and factored by grouping. My final answer, I ended up with 5, my GCF, 2x minus 3 times 3x minus 1. All right, here's our next problem. We have 5x squared minus 39x plus 28. Pause the video and factor this out. All right, I checked and there was no GCF, so I multiplied my a term, my c term, and got 140x squared. And then I was finding what added to negative 39. Notice these were very large numbers again, so this would be a time we probably wouldn't use factor by grouping. But the two factors ended up being negative 4x and negative 35x. So I placed them in my trinomial to create a four-term polynomial, factored by grouping, and my final answer was 5x minus 4 times x minus 7. All right, let's wrap it up with the last problem. We have here 3n squared plus n minus 2. Pause the video and factor this one by grouping. Okay, I multiplied my 3n squared times negative 2 to get negative 6n squared, and I was adding to my positive 1n. The two factors I found were negative 2n and positive 3n. I placed them in here and factored by grouping. My first terms only had an n in common, leaving 3n minus 2. Noticing that these are the same exact things already, I still had to factor something out. So I factored out a positive 1, leaving 3n minus 2. So my two factors were 3n minus 2 and n plus 1. Okay, this one, just like the previous one with the larger numbers, these numbers being so small, 3 is a prime number and 2 is a prime number, would have been easier by just guessing and checking. But it's always good to have multiple resources in our toolbox to do different ways. All right, be ready to practice this.